Hey everybody, BTO Pro here, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make an element that we had a request for from someone in the community that I don't particularly need, although I'm sure given the amount that I tweet, I could use it. It's a Twitter embed element. Normally when I do these, I kind of know what I'm going to make, and I just do it real fast. This one I'm going to actually step through a lot of the design constraints and considerations as far as, and I'm talking design of the element itself internally, with its class structure. I posted a poll on Twitter about whether someone wants to see this done in vanilla or in lit element or both. And it seems like most people want it in vanilla, but I'm going to do it in both because, there was interest in that too. So here we go. Take me off screen. There we go. Get that guy out of there. All right. In our issue queue, I've got this one from Tom, and it says embedding Twitter conversations. And it's effectively, hey, I tried to go and do this, and I ran into issues. Hide tools. Yeah, I don't need those tools open. So we've got a request to embed a conversation, and in Hack CMS, we highly sanitize, script as far as adding it to the page. So I had a little back and forth with him, said, hey, this is what it actually looks like. Not sure how this is going to work. You can read up on it. However, I said, I think I might be able to make something like this. And I posted a picture of something. So I have gone and executed WC Factories command WCF element just to get that out of the way. Effectively, what that gets us is a little bit of an initial boilerplate. We generally recommend using OpenWC. It's open-wc.org for getting boilerplates and getting started. But we managed several hundred web components in our mono repo, and so we had to build custom tooling that mirrors a lot of their approaches. Looking at this structure, we get a demo folder with index.html, an SRC directory that we work in, and then we have a yarn start that monitors this whole thing for changes and then generates twitter-embed.js. So you can see in our package.json, I have no dependencies currently, although I am going to add lit element here. And that would only be if you actually end up using the lit element version. So you could, roll this together. Yes, you would end up having that dependency on your file system, but if you use the base twitter-embed.js, that's going to be a vanilla element. So, okay, let's actually save. Sure. So let's get started on our twitter-embed.js. So I've got a terminal window open here. Make that a little bit bigger. So we can see that I'm in LRN web components /elements /twitter-embed. And from here, I'm going to do yarn start. And so yarn start is going to run Polymer CLI, which we still use for some, at times for local development. We kind of alternate between Polymer's initial CI route, or CLI rather, routine, and OpenWC. I actually think if we look at the command, this is running a watch on this folder. And I'm pretty sure that it's actually, if we go and look at what this routine is as far as the serve. Oh, there it is, ES Dev Server. So I apologize. It is actually running ES Dev Server. We just have a very Polymer-esque little element viewer thing here. So as far as the documentation. So, all right, the first thing we're going to do is make a vanilla element. And I mean, you don't have to, but I like adding what it is at the top. Right, so this is a Twitter embed, and then I like putting something about what it is. So a simple way to embed Twitter or tweets from Twitter without their whole API. All right, and then this aspect is a little specific to the little Polymer micro documentation thing there. But if I do this, and then we'll say element Twitter-embed, that should help with generating our little mini docs on this page. So, all right, now the first thing I need to do is I need to instantiate a class. So all web components are classes. I'm going to call this class Twitter embed, and it's going to extend from HTML element. All right, open and close. Then I'm going to do custom elements dot define, and we're going to do Twitter hyphen embed. And then we are going to do the class. So this is typically the way I have this at the bottom of all of my elements before I even get started with anything. And it's not extend, it's extends. All right, so you can see we start out, we have our new HTML tag that's going to be extending from HTML element. It's going to, imagine this is the same as window dot, but I like to do it without window. So it's assumed this is window dot custom elements dot define, Twitter hyphen embed, and then Twitter embed here. Okay, cool. So now we need to actually define what the heck this is. So if I hit save, see, this reloads and says, hey, there's Twitter embed. And if I hit demo, it'll just load this page and say, hey, here's this example, right? So I try to craft how I want the API to function. So looking at my demos, the only two files that I have open here, basically. Our tooling stamps this in, but effectively it's, hey, this is a demo, load up the polyfills. This is just something that I use in local development called deduping fix. Then there's web animations, next light, that polyfills animation API, although that probably isn't needed on this. And especially working locally, I don't really need any of these at the moment. But then just to give us our little styling as far as this, I import Polymer Iron Demo Helpers. This only works, runs in local development so that you can visualize it and provide little demo spaces for people. Then the way that this works is it gives you a demo snippet tag. In a template tag, you then write whatever you want, and what you end up getting is it actually will take what's in the demo snippet. If I can find it in the DOM there. There it is. Okay. So we can see that there's Twitter hyphen embed with the tweet information, and you see how the pointer is actually up here, even though our little embed snippet is here. So it just basically provides this little copy thing. You put it in once, it actually puts it in the page, but then gives people the ability to copy it. So as we can see, it's there, but it doesn't do anything, and we shouldn't have any errors. It's just sitting there. So the first thing I do before I build any element is let's look at what it is we're doing. So Jim Groom is someone I'm friends with on Twitter and in real life, whenever we get to actually hang out together again. But he posted this funny thing that just happened to be the tweet that showed up while I was thinking about working on this element. So got this fun little, Daft Punk thing, and it plays this GIF. So what I did is I went, okay, let's click on the side and say embed. And we see Twitter's little embed site, which you can throw in any status, and it's like, what do you want to embed? And it gives you the thing. You say, oh, copy and paste this code. So this is what Tom in our original issue was doing. He went and copy and pasted this code, which if we copy this code, actually, first let's look at customization. So their API has the ability to go light or dark. It has the ability of opt-out tailoring Twitter. So I highly recommend that. That's a tracking thing. And then it has hide conversation. I literally just want this. I don't want the rest of the conversation associated with it. I just want that. So I'll do hide conversation. You can also pick language, or it'll attempt to, auto-translate. So I'll leave it on automatic. All right, so let's update. Now we'll hit copy code. And let's just paste this in to our demo space so we can look at it. So you can see Twitter's little API here. At some point, this is one of these perfect use cases for a web component, really, if you think about it. So they're doing this hackery where it's, hey, there's going to be a block quote in the page, and so we'll just target this, and we'll look for this data hyphen DNT true, and we'll use data, right? So they're passing data and information around just via these attributes. And then they're having to do some silliness where we go, okay, well, the language to put it in, well, there's that EN, right? Because I selected automatic. And then there's direction is left to right. Now here's actual text of that tweet for SEO purposes. And then there's this little mini link, right? And then it's mini linking to Jim Groom. But then the real important part of how this whole thing works is there's a reference to the tweet itself. And so let's space this out so we can make it more readable, right? And that highlights the date. So you could click the date and jump to it. However, that's only if the JavaScript fails to load. And the JavaScript in question is this. So Twitter's embedding tells you, oh, well, just throw in our widgets.js and we'll discover it via the local API and hydrate it, if you will. So if I look at what this ends up doing, well, we don't need that page anymore. Down. Okay, so we'll go to our demo and say, oh, hey, it's exactly the way that I wanted it. However, it's had to load this widgets.js file, which is, 20, it's like 30K over the network, which is unfortunate. It also is only going to run initially. So if we inspect the DOM and actually look at what's going on here, we'll start to question why we even need this. But this is the area where I had that block quote. So it actually targets the block quote tag using, I don't know what, because it's compiled, something that looks like jQuery, but I don't think it is. It's just vanilla. Targets that and then replaces it with an iframe. So you don't even have styling injected to do the thing. They're basically targeting that block quote tag and then converting it into this iframe. So I don't want to have to put all of this in. I don't want users to have to put all this in. The API I want people to be able to do is just this. So Twitter-embed and the tweet, right? So I want to be able to take this and that be enough information to do the escalation. Now I know this is possible simply because if you take out this part from the block quote, there's nothing there, right? And then if I put it back in, and let's actually take out all the fodder text, right? So the SEO part of the text, let's take that out. Oh, it magically was still able to do it. And then let's take out the date so that there's nothing there, right? It's just an empty link. And, oh, there's a paragraph. So we probably don't even need this paragraph as far as language. It still somehow, via magic, was able to do it. So that's good news, right? It clearly used this attribute, but effectively what their script is doing is it's targeting block quote, looking for this, Twitter-tweet probably. I mean, let's take this off and see if that has any influence on it. Yeah, so it's using that class name to target this. And then, oh, that's the do not track. So don't track us. Yes, that's what that is. Okay, so it's got the do not track metadata in there, if you will, and the theme being dark, which I switch this to light and save just so we can see that it does successfully update. Cool. So they are targeting a block quote, and then they put that in place. Now, if I take this, though, and let's inspect the page, and let's edit the HTML that's surrounding this, and we're going to paste the original before it and hit save, or enter. So it didn't add an additional tweet to the page, and that's because their script only bootstraps once. So if that's all there at runtime, when that script executes, you're good to go. If you end up injecting an element after the fact, too bad. So that's kind of the context of this whole thing, right? We're trying to take this, put it in the page without having a script tag so that ultimately it works in hacks and other platforms, and simplifies our user experience. Someone could just write Twitter-embed, right? So we can also, imbue this tag with security implications, with lazy loading, all that great stuff that is way better than having to tell someone to copy and paste this gobbledygook, only to have it break at a later point in time. So I'm going to take this, and we're going to use this as kind of our boilerplate for building this thing out. So I don't necessarily want to have a dependency on calling that widgets file if all it's doing is hydrating the page and giving me the result. I care about the result. So let's put that back for a second. See if we can't just take this iframe that's here, right? There it is, iframe, and it replaced our block quote with this wrapper, right? We know it did because the thing after it is still widgets. So it didn't replace its widgets script, which is also now running on this page fully. So let's take this, we'll edit as HTML. I'm just going to copy all of the stuff that Twitter hydrated that into. to make show up. And then we'll just paste that. So let's see if that still works. This is what those scripts were hydrating to. And if we skip that, look, it loads faster because it doesn't have to go call out, get the widgets.js file in order to load just this little iframe thing here. So, okay, we've got their API, if you will. We've got the resultant of the API. How do we abstract this in a way that gives us the way that we want users to interface with it, which is to be able to just write Twitter-embed and then tweet. All right, so the way that I approach all these elements that I end up making is I usually start with something already. So I'm going to actually, let's leave that there so we have a comparison. I take the HTML that exists. We're going to make that the starting point of our element. So the way that I'm going to structure this, you can kind of do this any way you want, but I'm going to do a constructor just to get this set in motion. And then we call super. I'm going to do a connected, connected callback. And we'll do super dot connected callback. All right. And then I'm going to provide some type of render function as well as what the actual output is in question. So actually, I don't know if I'm going to need a connected callback. So let's just do constructors. Keep it as simple as possible. So I'm going to do a get HTML, and we're going to do return and do the backticks. Okay. We're just going to try to make this, replace it directly without any interactive data of any kind. So then I'm going to make a very basic render function. All right, and I'll document this for myself. Basic re-render of the HTML area. Okay. And you can call this whatever you want, but I'm just calling it render. Some other libraries call it render. So I'll do inner HTML, right? So in this case, this is the tag itself, right? So let's nullify whatever's in the tag. We don't care about anything in the tag for these purposes. Then I'm going to do, we are going to do this dot append child. And what we're going to append is going to be this HTML in question. So actually, I might be able to just do like this .html. All right, so this is going to effectively reset it to that. So let's see what we have at the moment. All right, so I've got my tweet here. I don't have anything. And the reason I don't have anything is because I haven't actually called the render function. I just wanted to kind of prove this is not actually part of the platform, air quotes. So I have to call the render function. So in our constructor, I can do this .render. And now everywhere that you go and write Twitter embed at this moment, you're just going to get a whole bunch of Jim Groom posts, which who doesn't love Jim Groom and his posts? He's going to love this video. So, all right, constructor, let's do minor, all right, HTML element, piece of the spec / class-based architecture in general. And that's what that is. This is with everything. HTML, right, this is my own convention. Easy to remember, though. And then render, let's also do my own convention. Again, easy to remember. And it'll be a basic re-render of the HTML area, right? So anytime we want to call render, we'll end up getting just this div stamped down again. Now, neat thing associated with this, right, is I could then right-click, and we're going to look at our Twitter tag here, right? There it is, Twitter embed. All right, I'm going to delete the inner HTML of that. And then I'm going to right-click, and we're going to do store as global variable. So now we've got that as a global variable as temp1. I'm going to do temp1.render. And voila, we have the inner HTML repainted, right? So this is one of the key aspects of web components we get, right? That's a lot of complex JavaScript potentially imbued into that tag, and I can call functions on it. So if I can select it in the DOM, I can do whatever I want that it has access to. Pretty cool. And this is just with vanilla, obviously, right? There's not much going on here. So let's space this out a little bit more so we can see, just make it a little more readable. All right, so we've got a div, we've got an iframe, and I don't think there's anything else that their API makes us have, but I am going to space the iframe out more. All right, so we'll do a div, do this, and then let's take the attributes and we'll put them one line at a time. So we can start to look at the different considerations potentially here. So we've got this style applied. All right, we've got the SRC as far as where this is pointing. And I want to say that that's it, actually. Oh, there's this data tweet ID, which I don't even know that they use. Okay. So these are all of our attributes that are in here, right? So now let's look at, right, from our original example, we've got this Twitter embed and then this huge identifier, which is, there's an insane number of tweets in the universe. But so let's search in here and see where that shows up in the iframe code. So the iframe only references the tweet there, and in data-tweet-id. I don't actually think it references Jim Broom anywhere. No, it doesn't. Sorry, Jim, you're not referenced anywhere. So that's that's a useful feature or thing to note about this, right? Is that all I really need is this identifier. Now, just from the way that an end user would probably use this, they're more likely to snag the entire URL and put it in there. So we're going to have to come up with, looking at that address and making a change to it. So we really only want a few attributes that people are allowed to modify. So we don't want them to change the class that's placed here, just so it matches what their API is. Twitter also always kicks out this thing at 550 pixels. So let's leave that alone as far as spacing for the moment. But what we do want to take into account, oh, and there's an empty class. So we can get rid of this empty class thing. What we do want to take into account is the theme, which the theme is light. There it is. Okay. So we've got theme light. We're not going to worry about widget version. And they do have a width, but I don't know that we'll update that at the moment. The width is 550 pixels, which shows up in 3 different places. So we could actually kind of tokenize that as well. Okay, so first what we want to do is, we've thought about what those attributes are, in my opinion. So first we want to turn these into variables that are meaningful. So I'm going to add this dot, we'll do width or Twitter width. I don't like making it just dot width because that could be confused with other original HTML attributes. And every place this shows up, it's 550px. Yes, okay. So it has the value actually with it. So we're going to do 550px here. Then another thing that we need to have available as a property is going to be theme. So Twitter theme equals, and the theme is going to be light to start. And then we need the tweet ID, or tweet rather, right? So I just have tweet there, so we'll do tweet equals. And at the moment, we're going to actually just copy the ID so we can figure out if this works. Okay. So I've set these properties internal to this class. And then because I've used backticks here, I can just write the variable in context. So I can do this dot, we'll do Twitter width, this dot Twitter width, there we go. All right, so the max width is that, and then I'm going to replace that everywhere that there's 550. So there's 550 out here in the URL. There's the theme, which is light, so we'll do theme and see that we have theme light there. So we're going to replace that with Twitter theme. And then we're going to take the tweet, and I'll actually name this tweet ID instead. So we'll do the tweet in question, and that is going to be this big number. So let's search for that big number, and we'll just do this dot tweet ID, copy, and then we'll find the big long number in the actual address in question, paste it in. Okay. So let's save and see what that does anything. Hey, cool. So what's different there? Well, the difference in question here is that we've actually, we've basically tokenized this. Now, you can't, as a user, modify the tokens, but we've added these properties to the element in question, right? I would consider this like forming the API. So this is like, what is the API of this element that you want someone to interface with? So do we want people to set width and theme and tweet ID? They probably could directly. But I did say that part of how we want to interface with the API is just tweet, right? And so someone puts the tweet URL and we're good to go. So I'm going to say this.tweet equals, and we'll just do null so that we have, kind of a placeholder that this is something we're going to work with. Now I need to be able to have people change tweet, but I need to be able to react to it. And so the way that you can react to changes in the data model in question of your element is through this thing called observed attributes. So what I want to write, and this is a core part of the platform, right? So this is HTML element core spec, right? And it's the same as the other things, as opposed to my convention, right? So this is same like this. You get a constructor no matter what. I'll just say spec, right? Spec. So this is going to be static get observed attributes. I wrote that right. Yep. Okay. Observed attributes. And then we're going to return an array of attributes to observe. So I can put in tweet, and then we'll put in our other ones too while we're here. So what these are going to be is Twitter width and Twitter theme and tweet ID. Now, of these, right, and I originally said, hey, Twitter width, okay. So this is really important in my mind to plan out what these are before you ever implement this, right? So if you think of the way that anyone will ever use this, they're going to always have to write Twitter-width and Twitter-theme and tweet-ID potentially. So why don't we just, I said I didn't want to do it, but let's just make it width instead. And let's just make it theme because there's no issue there. Or we could, you could make it theme width, or well, let's leave those as that. But we can change, and we don't have to peg the properties to the attributes, right? So this is our property internal to our web component. That doesn't necessarily ever have to be exposed to the outside world. We can have attributes, and maybe we want to do, data hyphen, because HTML has reserved these data hyphen attributes in this way, much like, Twitter used it. Why don't we do width and theme like this? Because it's entirely conceivable that the HTML spec could add theme as a valid attribute potentially. So we'll put those like that. Then what we need to do is we need a getter and setter associated with these. So that way we can bridge the gap between attributes and properties. So I'm going to do a get tweet. And if someone requests the value of tweet, it's going to return this dot get attribute tweet. And then I need to be able to set tweet, and I'm going to do, actually, it's going to return this dot tweet, come to think of it. Then if I'm going to set tweet, right, there's going to be a value that gets passed in. And in order to set it, I'm going to do this dot tweet equals value. Or actually, I'm going to do this dot set attribute rather. And it's going to be tweet value. And so what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between the properties internally and the attribute in question. And in fact, for this, I'm going to change that back to get attribute of tweet. Okay. So what this should do is it should help us start to bridge the gap between the user typing in, in this case, the developer, whatever their role is, tweet equals whatever. Well, we need our HTML element to react to this, to observe, hey, tweet is going to change, and I need you to do something. But we also need to, and this is part of where people honestly critique HTML element spec and web components in general, is this is super verbose to have to go and do this every time. This is part of the reason why people use lit element, as we'll see when I actually write the lit element version of this. Okay, we've got our observed attributes. We've got tweet. We've got the ability to set tweet and react to it as far as the property and attribute, values aligning. What we haven't done is actually reacted to the change in any way. So there's a way that you can do this and make your element interactive, and it's called attribute changed callback. Attribute changed callback. And it takes in 3 parameters. It's going to have the attribute in question, the old value in question, and the new value in question. And so this is also part of the HTML element spec. And so imagine that what we've done is said, anytime in the DOM this changes, I need you to update the property in question to match, but then I also need you to just run anything arbitrarily here. And so what we can do here is we can go if, and I like to do these includes because we're going to do a simple re-render function, but I'm going to do if tweet, right? So that means the tweet has changed. So includes attr. Then we're going to run, we'll do console.log just so we can see the value in question before we do anything. And then we're going to do attr, and we'll do old value just so we can see what's going on here. So I'm going to observe these other things. I'm going to be notified when this changes, and then I'm going to print out the values of it changing. So we'll see here via that auto reload that we've got tweet changed to, right, because that's new value, Jim Groom, and it changed from null, right, the old value. Cool, so we set it as null, right, and that happened in the constructor. The thing is in the page, because we've set observed attributes to tweet, when I write tweet here, it's going to then run attribute changed, notice that this is included in the attributes that have changed, and then print out the values, right, into the console. To prove that this makes it more reactive, and that, as opposed to just being a static HTML element, it does actually change when the values change. So if I go to the Twitter embed and we'll see stuff, right, it changes it to say stuff. Hooray. So, all right, we're going to set tweet, which is going to set the value. We're going to get tweet, which gets the attribute. And, okay, so now we've got stuff, things, right? You can just see that it cycles between them. All right, so we need to do something meaningful with that now. So because we're trying to get tweet ID from tweet, this will be a fun one. So whenever tweet changes, in fact, let's just do attribute change callback for everything. Let's just print that out there at the moment for debugging, and we want to know the attribute, and then we'll just do like this for the moment. So we know that that has changed to this new value. So if the tweet has changed, we'll do if 12 attr equals, you'll see in a minute why I'm doing it that way, equals tweet. Then what we want to do is we're going to need to calculate the tweet ID. And the way we do that is by breaking the URL off to figure out what the identifier, the ID in question is. So there's a real easy way that we can do that, and it should be something, let's go look, JavaScript split URL by, there we go, by slash. Right, so how to split a URL to get URL path in JavaScript. Okay, person says split, path name, URL path name, right? So should this give me just the path in question? You can see people, their different answers. URL.length -1. Yeah, that would be an interesting way to approach that. Right, so I could split on this, which is going to give me an array. So let's try that. Let's do if tweet is this, then we're going to do console.log, and we're going to do this dot. We'll do new value dot split, and we'll split it on that slash and see what the value in question is. All right. So the value in question, we end up with taking that address that was a URL and we chunk it into an array. And then we can just do pop. All right, so dot pop. And that should give us the last value. Ta-da. So we want to make sure that this is actually a valid URL. Before we do that, I'm going to say if it's tweet and new value includes the thing that we want to see if it includes is twitter.com. All right, so if it includes twitter.com, then filter through. So that's a very basic data sanitization, but let's put 2 of these in, and then let's just add like that and see if it breaks. We still got 2 of them, and it's still filtered through here. So what if it's not a valid URL? Let's just do tweet equals that. Probably still pop that off, but be like, I don't know what that is. Yeah, so it's got this FSD fill in the blank. Okay, so what we're going to do is, all right, so we included twitter.com, which means let's do, make sure it actually did filter that out. I think it did. Yeah. Okay, so here only shows up once because that value is what came through, right? So this isn't foolproof, but this is a decent enough method for what we're doing right here. So just make sure that it has Twitter in the address in question. Okay, so now we know that if we are able to pop this value off, that is the tweet ID. So we could say tweet ID equals that. We're going to set that to null now. Hopefully, we still get our little Jim Groom. Oh, ID is a required parameter. That looks bad. So let's look at tweet ID. Right, so it's going to put this tweet ID in there. We still have our lower one, right, which is our, what our example of what we're looking towards. Tweet ID null. Now, because the tweet ID is really critical for this to even do anything meaningful, we want to look at, okay, well, what happened? Okay, so what happened is when the tweet changes, we're not re-rendering, which we should, right? We're calling render initially. Well, tweet is null when we render initially, and tweet ID is null. So why are we rendering at all? Because it's not going to actually show us anything meaningful. We're going to make a meaningless request to their iframe without the parameters we need. So we're going to take that out of our constructor. We're only going to render when we get a tweet ID. We need a tweet ID. If we don't have a tweet ID, this is completely meaningless, right? So what's going to happen, and we could do it on tweet as well, but because we need to engineer the tweet ID from the tweet, it's not really that useful to do. We can take when the attribute is tweet ID or width or theme, right? And we do still want to observe tweet, right? Because that's how we're engineering tweet ID. If it's any of those, then we'll pass through. So we see at the moment, it's not actually doing that. And I think it's because we need tweet ID, right? We need a get and set on that too. So we're going to make a getter and setter on tweet ID. And whenever we want to get that, whoops. Right, so whenever tweet ID changes, which is what's happening here, right? The property is changed. So when the property is changed, set the attribute to the value in question is the way that you can read that. And then whenever somebody wants to get tweet ID, get it from the attribute. That helps us map our properties and attributes. And you see that one change. Now, whenever we update the property, we end up getting this downstream. Now let's see if this is able to update on the, and you see we don't get it for, right, that one because it didn't meet it didn't match our criteria. So let's see here. Let's take this secondary tweet that doesn't do anything, and we're gonna find one of my tweets, BTO Pro. There we go. Status. All right. So this is me earlier saying, hey, what do people want to see? Neat. So I'm going to take that, we'll copy that, and we're going to paste it as the tweet. And we see it hydrates, right? Because it now matches the criteria of having twitter.com and the tweet attribute being updated. And then, which updates the property tweet ID, which is then on the setter mapping to the tweet ID in question here. So that's pretty cool. It's a little roundabout there. So we want to set tweet when the value changes. Perhaps we want to do it when it changes and it's not null, right? So what we could do probably is say like, all right, so we're going to set that if value equals null, this dot remove attribute tweet ID. All right, and we'll just do else. So this is a common way that I have these set up. I don't write a ton of vanilla, honestly. I do mostly lit element, but this is the way that I have most of these set in motion. And then I do the same thing on tweet. Whoops, sorry, on set tweet. So that way we don't end up with null written on the page there. Right, so it puts those in place, and then we should be able to look at this Jim Groom container here, scroll up, and we see tweet ID equals that. Yay, so it's not going to put the tweet there if it's null, because we don't care about it. So we should be able to get tweet from the attribute, but you can't monitor or change attributes in your constructor. So I don't actually think I need either of these to be null with an initial value. Let's see if that influences it at all. No, it's still there. Okay. What I'm trying to make sure is I like to have the data that's visualized in the page. There we go. Actually match what the data is in question. So I took out the default value of tweet being null. And now if you add a tweet in, it's going to just hydrate correctly, right? So if I have tweet here and we paste that, whoops, paste BTO Pro in there again. There we go. Then it'll hydrate appropriately, and we have tweet and the tweet ID. Just in the event that I need to, I like to keep the attributes accurate to what their properties are when I bother to map them in the first place. All right, so now we still need to do width. So I think I'm going to change that from this whole Twitter width thing just for simplicity. We're going to do data width and data theme to match these are data width and data theme. So now we're going to have to take our same little, right, get and set on each of those so that we can map them between each other. We're going to do data width, right, and then we'll get attribute on data width. If data width is null, remove it from the DOM. All right. So now we've got data width matching, and then the other one is data theme. All right, so data theme. this in, theme, and then we'll copy, paste. All right, so now we can set data theme, remove it. We probably, though, want to make sure this can't actually be null in the case of themes. So if data theme has been set to null, let's force it to be set to light equals light. And that way, we don't accidentally screw up the default value coming across from Twitter. So because their API is going to want a light or dark value, right? They don't want you to just put some random word. Speaking of which, another way we can do that is if value does not or dot, let's do this. All right, so we'll do if not the dot includes. All right, so we'll make up an array on the fly, which the only two values that are valid is dark and light. So the theme, when we go to set theme, is going to validate, oh, hey, if you have given me a value that's not dark or light, I'm going to force it to be light just to make sure that it's okay. If it is dark or light, then we're going to set the attribute to match. So now I need to go and find, there's Twitter width. Okay. I need to replace Twitter width with data-width. Okay. Save. Whoop. And then we need to deal with theme, right? Because we changed Twitter theme to data theme. So now let's take my tweet. We'll have mine and Jim's there, just so we can compare between. And then I'm going to try to do data-theme equals. And in the case of the data-theme, we're going to do dark for his. And for mine, we're going to do weirdo, and we'll see if that validates correctly. Now, we do also have to make sure there's a width set, right? Because we're going to take out data theme being light, and if it's nothing, it's going to, well, actually, we'll keep it at light, whatever. Data width, we should also say that if it's null, we want to remove it. Yeah, we'll leave that as is for now. Let's see if this works. So it did work. It says that data theme is set to dark. And then it says that this tweet happened, right? The ID. So we've got both of them there. They're both the right width. Like that hasn't changed, but they're both light. Now, in the case of mine, that's good because it wanted to force it to say weirdo. And it shouldn't allow that. So let's see if we can't debug that a little bit. So got our observed attributes. Let's put in here this value changed piece. See if it's actually influencing on those. Right, so dark and then ID equals that. So that is only happening because it's noticing it here, which means it should trigger a re-render. Let's do. So it does say dark there. Does say dark, theme equals dark. Let's look in the DOM here. All right, so no theme equals dark. Data-theme equals. Okay, so there's light. So the default value flipped it over. So let's get rid of this default value here. I wonder if I can actually check I don't think you can check attributes, but let's see. Get attribute data-theme. See if I can get that in the constructor. Oh, I can. Okay. So that was my mistake. There is an issue where if you try to set attributes in the constructor, I believe that's a problem. So if I try to do set data theme to things, I actually think this will throw an error. I don't think you're allowed to set attributes in a constructor. Yeah, and it's a pretty hard brick. You can see it just didn't recompile the element appropriately. Unless I have a syntax error, which I don't think I do. Oh, no, maybe I lied. Maybe you can set it there. Well, I don't recommend setting attributes directly in the constructor, but that's odd. All right, so let's do this instead. Let's do okay, we'll do so if we get that, then use that. Otherwise, use light. And we'll do the same for width. So we're saying if there's a value here, then we want to use it. Otherwise, default fall back to the default value in question. Oops, I have too many parens there. Okay, and then we need to do 550 because it's the width. So let's see if that worked. Hey, dark theme, light theme. And the reason this is a light theme is it allowed weirdo to be set, but then it self-corrected and it said, bro, you can't do weirdo. That weirdo is not a valid value. Cool. So now we are able to switch between the tweets in real time. We're able to change the color. Let's verify that the width works. I've never actually tried the width part, but all right. So Twitter defaults at the 550. Let's see if I can't do Twitter data width equals, we'll say 200 pixels. And then for this one, and we'll take out weirdo because it's not valid input. Actually, that's another good test case is if it's like that, okay. And then we'll do data width in this case is like 1,000 pixels. I have a big monitor. Okay, so it did cut it off there at 200. This one seems like it was kind of, well, there's only so big this can get. Let's get rid of this data width. See if the 1,000 is even noticeable. I don't know what it is. No, because of the way that I figured it wouldn't be because of the way their styling works. So that's probably safe to leave alone. I don't know that I'd really want to mess with that, but it's cool that we have that ability. The last thing we want to check in here before we move on to the lit element version of this would be what happens if we don't include a tweet, but we actually just skip and supply a tweet ID. So currently I'm not doing this get the attribute directly, right? So what I could do is we could do the same type of thing with our tweet and tweet ID, right? So if there's a tweet, then get the tweet. Otherwise, it's null, right? And that should fix the issue that I was demonstrating earlier with matching the data in question. The other thing is tweet-ID. So if we have a tweet-ID, use that as the default value. So let's just make sure that that works first. Okay, so this looks fine. And let's inspect one directly. Okay. All right, so it still has the tweet there, right? That's what we wanted to make sure was still there, yeah. Okay, and the tweet ID is reflected appropriately. And hey, the data width is too, so that's fun. Now, in the case of width, I could take the get width. I could, you don't have to put these necessarily, but if you want the user to be able to influence them, then you kind of do. As far as influence them just in the DOM. So you could also have attributes and properties that they can't influence in the DOM, intentionally. So let's, as one last thing, let's see if we can't just supply a tweet ID directly. So if I did, if I knew how the API worked, and I said, I just want mine to be directly to the ID, what that does. Awesome. So you see, in this case, it doesn't have to do that, the additional processing, right, to chunk that off. So we just get the tweet in question. So sweet, we've got our iframe. Let's go for bonus points now. So we've got our thing that can embed. We no longer have to have, right, the example in question. And we, more importantly, don't need to have our widgets.js file loading who knows what into our website. right? So this should be a more secure implementation of the Twitter API as well, right? As opposed to if, God forbid, widgets.js got poisoned, a lot of sites would be in trouble that were just generic blogs and things like that. So okay, so now we've got the ability to toggle the dark theme. We've got the tweet ID, the tweet. Let's go. We're going to drop this console log. We don't need that anymore, right? We know we're going to re-render, air quotes, anytime that tweet ID or width or theme has changed, which means tweet doesn't actually influence it, but because tweet influences tweet ID, we end up getting the correct thing. So, okay, let's add some bonus points. So 2 bonus points we can add to this that are not in the original one in question. One is now browsers are starting to support loading equals lazy. And so not everything supports it yet. Like if you check out Can I Use, I don't believe it's supported everywhere, but you can now set things like iframes to lazy load, which means it won't load the content in question until you actually have it in the viewport. Without anything more advanced than literally writing loading equals lazy. So there's one super easy bonus point. Now the way that we can actually illustrate this is let's put a whole bunch of these on the page to scroll that way down. Okay, save, and then let's see. Let's do inspect here. So sources, network. Yeah, network. We should be able to find Twitter, right? In some. Okay, so if I scroll down, do you see those 2 extra loads? Oh, 3. All right. So that's pretty cool. So now if I go back up, right, and we reload the page, loading faster. And then as we scroll down, you can see it loaded in because it was about to hit the viewport. So that's a super easy way of improving time to first paint, improving perception of performance, things like that. Why load this stuff that's down below the fold until the user actually bothers to swipe or scroll there? So this is another one of these sweet little advantages in the web component sphere, right? Is taking an HTML primitive like an iframe and then optimizing it for performance based on your use case, instead of just saying, well, the default is to not show it, or the default is to always show it, even if it's not visible, sorry. So another thing that we should probably bother to at least look at, I don't know if we can really influence this that much, but is it's not lazy loading, it's sandboxing. So sandboxing is that you can specifically define the privileges that this iframe has. So if you say iframe sandbox, right, you can say, hey, it's not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. Now this is a nice article. I'll post it in the notes. It's on HTML5 Rocks. It's from a while ago, 2013, but it's still totally relevant. We can prevent this from doing things to our domain by design. So let's see if we just go with sandbox and say allow same origin, allow scripts, allow pop-ups, allow forms. And let's see what we can boil this down to and still make it work. So, okay, we've got it running in sandbox mode now. So now we scroll down the page and it loads, and then I can click it and it still opens in a new window. So that's fine. So now let's try and take off the allow same origin. All right. Down. Oh, it's gone, right? So you can see the sandboxing at play. If you go to console, right, it's gonna complain, hey, your frame has said this isn't allowed. So we need allow same origin. Let's see if we can take off allow forms. So we take off allow forms and it still works, right? So we've sandboxed it so it can't do certain things to us. And I can still click through and open this in a new window. But another interesting thing with that, right, is I could say, well, don't allow pop-ups. If I don't allow that frame to pop up, it'll still load. But now when I go to click on it, and you can see the errors piling up, it won't allow me to open that in a new frame. right? So this is another area where we can add some real simple flexibility. Like perhaps you don't want it to pop up. Well, typically you don't have that level of control. But, and again, I could take off allow scripts. Let's take off allow scripts and we'll see what happens. I'm sure it's nothing. So if we take off allow scripts, yeah, you don't see anything. And the reason is because Twitter obviously needs to use JavaScript in order to open that up. So we could also add in a flag that would allow people to turn off the pop-ups, right? So let's say this dot allow pop-ups. And now we go into our element in question. We want to monitor no pop-ups. So we're going to make a new flag on here, right? So maybe the default is, yeah, you click it and it pops up. But maybe you're like, I really don't want people to go and pop up and open to Twitter. I want them to stay, particularly because we work in education. Maybe I don't want you going off to Twitter. That's distracting. But I do want to reference, this art historian that had this really great thread on Twitter. And so I want to put some of those tweets in context. I can do that and it help improve the experience as far as you not getting distracted. So to allow pop-ups equals, right? And then we'll say this dot get attribute. And the attribute we're going to get is the no pop-ups attribute. Right? So if no pop-ups is true, then that means that we want allow pop-ups to be nothing. If no pop-ups is false or not available, then it means that we want it to be allow pop-ups. It's a little confusing. I'll show why in a second here. So, all right, there's allow pop-ups value, which is off of the no pop-ups. And now the other thing, now that we're observing it, is we're going to want to re-render if that changes, right? To respect the user's defined security that they've asked for with this. Okay, so we've got get attribute, no pop-ups, and so now we're going to need get no pop-ups, or actually, I think it's just, yeah, I think we're okay on that front, actually. So all we want to do is we want to do something similar to this other attribute change. So now if the attribute no pop-ups changes, then the variable allow pop-ups, and I could have made it no pop-ups, but I like being difficult, is going to do identical logic here. So it's going to be new value. We'll take out this twitter.com piece. Right. So if the attribute no pop-ups has changed, then set allow pop-ups to either nothing or allow pop-ups. And I shouldn't actually need to do anything with the no pop-ups aspect, but let's see if that worked. So we'll scroll down, it loads. I can click and open it as it should because I didn't define it. Now let's take the second one and we're going to say no pop-ups. Okay, frames lazy load, Daft Punk one. We click, loads. Oh, that one opened too. Darn it. All right, let's see what happened there. So we've got this one. It's saying allow pop-ups. So let's see when no pop-ups has changed, what the actual value is. Console.log new value. It's nothing. Oh, okay. All right, so if new value equals nothing, and the other thing to do here is let's see what the value of this get attribute is. All right, so on line 18, it's null. Okay, so this is actually null. So this is a little making sure we account for this appropriately, right? So if instead of nothing, it should be null. So if it's null, we keep the data type the same. So that way later on in the document, when we check for if it's null, hey, there we go. That time it worked. Okay. So what was happening there is I was setting allow pop-ups to be empty. And empty is not the same as null, right? So let's do this as, so now when no pop-ups changes, we're going to do the exact same logic as we did before, right? So we're going to apply, hey, if it equals nothing. And now I should be able to do this, right? So no, actually, if it equals nothing, or how are we? Well, let's just do if it equals nothing. And we'll add some common ones, right, to account for any difference in variables, or not new value, or new value equals null. This is another one I've had to do sometimes. And it's just, again, because this is, I'm sure TypeScript people will be horrified that I would even write something like that. But therefore, that way I'm accounting for different attributes. And it says, oh, hey, the attribute null is an invalid sandbox flag, which is where I need this, right? I need to be able to do this type of specifying that the value has changed. There we go. Because if someone says no pop-ups, well, I'm setting it to null. And then what we're doing internally here is saying, well, no pop-ups is going to get triggered to notice the change, right? So maybe if I take this out, let's see if it still works. Oh, undefined, right? So the attribute's undefined, so it doesn't need an initial value. Okay. So then we'll do that. And then we can take out our console log. And so now Jim Groom's should open because I didn't define it, but mine with its security enhancement says, hey, you can't pop this up. So there's two nice little enhancements on top of what their API originally said, right? And actually, the integration downstream for my users, because then I'll wire this to Hacks, is going to be even easier, right? So now they're going to have access to embedding a tweet just by copying and pasting the address. But they're also going to have these security enhancements like, well, say whether or not you want pop-ups to exist. So that's a cool little enhancement on top of it. Let's look at this in lit element. So a lot of this I can repurpose. I'm actually I like to make a lib directory for additional, oops, not in that folder. A lib directory for additional elements. So let's do lib. And then in here, I'm going to make a Twitter-embed lit.js. Now, this is another little convention thing I like to do is I'll take the name of the tag and we'll do .tag. Right? So instead of that, we actually end up having a static get tag, return Twitter embed. That way it could be overloaded. You can change the value, stuff like that, of the tag in question if you really needed to. Okay, so now we've got all of this stuff. Okay, how do we want to do this in lit element? So let's start from nothing because a lot of times I skip ahead. So we're going to import lit element, and we're going to import another one called HTML from lit element. I like to put in the full. It's still a bare importer because it doesn't have the path resolved, but I like putting in direct access to the JavaScript file in question. I know that's not for everybody, but that's personally, I like to know exactly what the thing it's pointing at is. Anyway, so we've got Twitter embed, right? So same thing as this, and I'll just copy and paste that to save time. So this is a Twitter embed, and we'll say with lit element, right? So your main difference is this is going to have a dependency and the other one isn't. Now, instead of HTML element, this is going to extend lit element. And lit element is going to give us some additional niceties. So I'm going to take that, paste that in, and then we're going to need our static get tag. Okay, static get tag. is Twitter embed. And we need to, I think if I have the class be the same, I don't think that would be a big deal, but still, just to be safe, embed lit. All right, so now we're exporting Twitter embed lit. And we need to make sure that the tag is different because you can't have two definitions for the same tag or you'd cause an error in the DOM. And then let's add that one in too. So let's do import /lib/Twitter embed -lit. That way we have the definition and scope. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these and we're going to have this one be the lit version and the one before it be the vanilla version. Now, generally speaking, from a semantic naming convention, I don't do this. Right? I don't say this is created with lit element because I don't want that in there. But because a few people tweeted and said that they want to see this, then I will add it. And then when we're done, I will figure out if I want this to be in lit element or not. We do use lit element a lot. I personally love the conventions of lit element. But I get why people don't want dependencies. So, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do constructor, just like before, do super, just like before. And then I'm going to borrow some of these defaults, but I'm not going to have to do all this craziness with these attributes. So I'm going to say it's 550. I'm going to say theme is going to be light by default. I'm going to say tweet is going to be null. I'm going to say tweet ID is going to be null. Cool. And then what was my allow pop-ups? Our default state is to allow pop-ups. Yes. Okay. Equals allow pop-ups. Whoop. So if I could copy and paste accurately, would help. All right. So we've got our constructor again for the verbose aspect, right? I don't have this in question. Now the observed attributes, the thing to replace that with is static get properties and lit element, which is going to return a block of properties. And so the properties that we're going to care about are going to be tweet, type, and you have to define what the type is. And then you have to define if you want it to reflect to the attribute in question. I'm going to do it for this one. We don't need to necessarily do that, but just so that we have a exact one-to-one with how this originally worked, because I don't want someone to say, well, this one doesn't have the attribute reflecting and the other does. So I like to do things as fast as possible. I'm going to use the camel case data width, data theme. Then I'm going to do attribute, which is another decorator on here, and I can say this. So when you do this attribute data hyphen aspect, what you're doing is you're skipping this whole thing. So this is another reason people like lit element is, right, there was a lot of additional boilerplate I had to write just to say like, hey, properties and attributes should be the same. Okay, now they are. Tweet ID, and that's a string. It helps that all these are strings. And then no pop-ups, and allow pop-ups. Yeah, actually, you know what? No pop-ups is type Boolean. Yeah. And we're going to definitely reflect that. And we want the attribute, though, to be no pop-ups. And then allow pop-ups, we're not actually going to touch. We're going to allow no pop-ups to influence allow pop-ups, just like we had before. So that forms our defaults for these. Tweet ID I've listed twice. And tweet ID also is going to need attribute tweet hyphen ID. Now, this is another thing. Lit element will automatically just make this like that in the DOM. Again, I like my data models to match perfectly, with camel case being in my properties on the JavaScript side and attributes being the hyphenated version of the camel case in every instance. You don't need to do that. Just, that's the way that I like to do it, convention. I don't really need to reflect these So I won't reflect them. You'll just have the default value internal. They're useful for reflecting when you're using CSS selectors. But since this element doesn't have any of its own styles in question, that shouldn't be a big deal. Okay, so next part is the render function. So I'm going to take this, and I actually wrote it this way with the backtick so that I could just copy and paste. And so we're going to return a render function, and this is going to return HTML, and then that. Whoops, not the word return. So, and you'll notice this is also somewhat color-coded correctly, which is also cool. So lit element is going to, it has this thing called HTML, which is going to take this and correctly rewrite it. So I think I might need to put, period there. I don't know why allow full screen is claiming that I need to set to true if the iframe attribute is of type Boolean. Oh, I see. So, okay. Allow full screen is claiming it's true. So, I fixed a little thing that comes from Twitter incorrectly. So this is claiming it wanted that on sandbox, I guess. Allow scripts. Oh, I think it's complaining about the ones in question because it doesn't know what allow pop-ups is going to be, but that's fine. All right, so the last piece we need to be notified when our properties update. So we do update. There's first updated, but we'll just do updated. Changed properties. And so this is your equivalent of the observed attributes, because these things are listed in properties, are automatically observed, and attribute changed callback. So this is the function that's going to run every time. Changed properties dot for each. In there, you're going to get an old value, and you're going to get a prop name. All right. Let's use the big arrow connotation. All right. So then I'm going to say if prop name equals no pop-ups, then whenever that changes, we're going to set this dot allow pop-ups to be this prop name. Actually, I need to also put allow pop-ups type string in there. So now, because this is in the properties area, any property that's listed here, this is going to re-render automatically. It's going to re-stamp the template down whenever any of these things change. So out of the gate, let's see if this works. I don't honestly know if it has issues or not. It's part of live coding. So it seems like it, oh, no, okay, that opened. Error while parsing the sandbox attribute, true is an invalid sandbox flag. Okay, so something allow ups should be this allow pop-ups. Oh, I see. Okay, so I made a mistake there. So no pop-ups. So this should be, it did it correctly actually. So if this prop name, right? So if there is something saying, hey, we don't have no pop-ups, then this dot allow pop-ups equals nothing. And if it's not enabled, then this dot allow pop-ups equals our default value, which is to allow pop-ups. So I have a value to translate there. Okay, didn't throw any errors. Oh, it got mad about the ID. Okay, so now we see in the BTO Pro one, it worked. So that's awesome. But it didn't work in this one, and that's because I didn't bring along the logic to deal with popping off the end of the URL. So You need to also notice that. Notice we get rid of this render function because that just happens. Whenever any of those things change and we're monitoring them, it's just going to update automatically. It's a nice feature of lit element. Okay, so again, we're going to say if prop name is that, and now new value has been replaced with actually just accessing the value in question. All right, so we're going to update tweet ID if the prop name tweet has changed. Hey, it's there, sweet. We've got all of them. Oh, and our lazy loading in place. Let's see what this is complaining about with null. Oh, I see. So we need to do an additional, hey, if this exists, I think is all that was complaining about. Yep. Okay. So now we have our vanilla and lit element versions of these. They both do the exact same thing in the end. One has a dependency, one doesn't. The lit element one in question here, again, I have things spaced out on multiple lines, so you can read into that what you want, but it's 84 lines of code for the lit element version. And for the vanilla version, it's 118. So, some of these are convention-based, right? You could say like, well, you don't need a render function there, right? Because you only call render once. So I could say, okay, well, I guess I could delete this render function, and then we can just do it there. That's fine. All right, so there's also some doc block commenting that I did here that I didn't do in the other one. So they are similar in size, right? But the big things are around property changes, notification that things have been modified, right? There's some syntax change here. I also had to do this, right? I had to do all of this like, okay, we'll get the attribute if the attribute's not set, so we don't have a default value, right? That stuff just happens, which is really nice. Right, this is much cleaner looking. The properties, it's much more readable as to what the properties are. So even just from reading this and passing around, from an API standpoint, let's do the doc blocking here. So popular convention / lit element. So that's a lit element thing, but some other projects do it. Let's do lit element of attributes changed callback, and then lit element properties definition. But we still have constructor, which is a very HTML element spec, that type of thing, right? So now when we've done that minor change, we have 111 lines there and 96 here. So very few difference ultimately with that. So let's see, title, Twitter tweet, right? We've got some other, we can actually take the title and move that over there. Another thing that we might want to consider would be that one of these has a shadow DOM and the other one doesn't. I don't think that's a huge deal for this example. However, if we were to have implemented this as Twitter wanted to originally with having that widgets.js get injected into the page, currently this lit elements contents, and we'll see what the difference is, doesn't make a ton of difference here, right? So the lit element one has a shadow root, right? And so that re-rendering is happening in here, but it's also, it's tunneled away. It cannot be styled, right? This width 100 cannot currently be influenced, as a simple example. Now, this is actually beneficial in this instance because we have an ID, and the ID is Twitter widget 0. So if you have 50 tweets on the page, technically, in the light DOM, I'm going to end up having Twitter, where is it? Twitter ID equals 0. Yeah, Twitter widget -0. Now, I don't think that's actually used anywhere, so I should be able to just get rid of that. So let's get rid of Twitter widget 0. The other thing I could do is, put in a link or a reference to the tweet. And yeah, it's fine without it. I could have put in a reference to, the tweet ID, right, to make it a more unique value. But then you could still have two copies of the same, web component on the page. So now we've gotten rid of that. That shouldn't be a big deal either way. I don't really know what else there is to add to this. I'm pretty happy with it, other than it has this embed ID. Let's see if we take the embed ID aspect out of the page. It does have do not track, which is great. We don't want the tracking overlords on us. So save. Oh, good. It works without that even. Cool. All right. So now we have our component, right? Yep. There we go. That we can't click. Can't click, but it's vanilla versus lit element. And this one that we can click and that we can click. So I'll submit these up to my repo now after I integrate this with Hacks. So let's go a step further here, get a little crazy. We're going to go over to the Hacks repo, and we're going to open that up and show the way that I then wire stuff up to Hacks, and that we make this something that normal people, not the ones that have any idea what any of this screencast is about, could be able to handle. So Hacks has an app store area, and this basically teaches Hacks what to load and what it can work with. So I'm going to add Twitter-embed. All right. So this is your bonus portion. So I know that my repos are published like that. So we've got our Twitter embed.js. Let's look at another tag that actually has Hacks integration, and it's Meme Maker. So Meme Maker, the way that things integrate with Hacks is, oh, and there's even the Hacks progressive enhancement, which is cool. But the way things integrate with Hacks is they just have this one function that they supply called static get Hacks properties. And so I'm going to add that into my vanilla element because it works with vanilla. It works with any web component. But so we'll just copy in that boilerplate. So this is what's going to show up in the interface for someone else. So I'm going to say that the name of this is Twitter embed because, you know, they want to embed a tweet. Or, so embed a tweet from Twitter in context. So just one. We'll leave it at that for the moment. We'll make it blue because their logo is blue. This is social media. Right. In nature. We don't want one of these handles blocks because that's not useful in this instance. We are the authors of this. Okay, so then we map attributes to what the end user can do. So we're not going to mess with the advanced tab. We should be able to build a pretty simple form here. So because we have all attributes in question, right, we're going to copy these for reference so we know which ones we want to be able to influence. So this is a abstraction of JSON schema, which is an actual standard. So it's an abstraction on top of JSON schema that just makes it even easier for developers to map things to form fields. So I'm actually creating a form, the form by which someone could interface with the Twitter embed API, if you will. So I'm not going to let people use the tweet ID because in this case, it's going to be easier to communicate to someone, hey, just go and do, copy the URL, right? So I'm going to do property, or actually this is going to be an attribute, is tweet. I don't want them to influence width because we proved that didn't do much. We are going to let people influence the theme. It's going to be that. All right, so tweet URL, URL of the tweet in question to be embedded. Input method is going to be text field. Okay. And I don't even think we use icon at the moment, so we'll just get rid of icons. All right, so we've got tweet. I don't want tweet ID in there. We are going to want this no pop-ups thing, right? So that's going to be attribute no pop-ups, event pop-up on click. This blocks the user from accessing or from clicking the tweet and going to twitter.com. Right, so especially if this was like on a government, I don't know why they would, never mind. But whatever property would have someone embedding a tweet if you don't want them to actually go to the Twitter website when they select it. And this is input type Boolean. Okay, then we've got data theme, and this is the theme, light or dark version of Twitter tweets. We could also make that, actually respect the values of whatever the user has set for dark mode. That would be pretty cool, but we're not going to do that at the moment. This uses a list. Let me really quickly find one that has schema associated with a list. There we go. Because I just forget what it is sometimes. Select. I saw select. Select. It's very easy to write, but there we go. Okay. So you can do input method select, and then we can have options. So, all right, we don't need maker open anymore. We don't need that open anymore. Where did our tag go? There it is. Okay. So then under theme, we're going to have input method is select, and then we're going to have options. And for those options, it's either going to be light or dark. Light, dark. Okay, so, oh, then we could have a demo as well, but we're not going to do the demo schema necessarily. Well, I guess we could do that. So the demo is what happens if a user, adds a default one to the page or something. Save options, we don't need to worry about that. We don't have advanced options for this one. So we're going to do Twitter embed. There's no content inside of it. And then we're going to default to no pop-ups being true. And then we're going to say tweet. And we are going to make the default tweet one about this, which is kind of funny, about this tag being made. I know you're in here. There you are. Okay. All right. So then we don't need the top and bottom text. And what is it? Data theme. The other cool thing is you can should be able to do it this way and have it work correctly. But so the theme is, let's go dark as our default, right? So there's no pop-ups. The data theme, actually, I think we should be able to do, no, let's just leave it no pop-ups. Let's see what happens. I haven't done one of these in a bit. So, okay, so now Twitter embed should be valid. It should be wired for hacks. And now when we go over to our little hacks test bed and start, let's see if it works. I don't, this is the nature of live demos. Let's see if we have any errors. It's always a good start. Some nice content script zone destroy. That's always a cool name. I actually think that this little thing at the bottom is a web component that's injected into the page. Because I did see it in one link. It is saying that it tries to import Twitter embed, but it's not there. I might have to do a very quick little hack, if you will, to my local development environment. No, it says it's there. Twitter embed is right there. Oh, okay, I do. All right. I mean, I don't normally have to do this, but I also don't do live demos without doing a yarn install typically. So just a minor internal tooling thing so I can work on this stuff live. Normally, if I would run yarn start again, or sorry, yarn install on the whole mono repo, you would end up seeing it. So, all right, let's see. Oh, Twitter embed is listed. Oh, okay, so it doesn't like the flag on it for preventing pop-ups. Let's see what it tried to put in the page. Twitter embed, all right, data width. It came up with theme is light. It has the tweet in question and it has the tweet ID. So that's all awesome. It does have the contents inside of it though. So right there, you can see one of the options that I took out a second ago and said, oh, I don't need right. And that was, let's go back in time here. There it is, that wipe slot part. So the wipe slot tells it that when it's going to save to a database or, dump it out as an HTML blob, whether it should get rid of its inner HTML. Now, this would be a difference between the lit element one and the vanilla, right? Because the vanilla actually writes into its this.inner HTML, and the lit element one keeps it in shadow DOM, so it wouldn't need to do this. So it's what? No pop-ups. Let's see if we can do no pop-ups. And let's try this. Sometimes this helps some of these. Whoops. Let's do data hyphen theme, right? Because it's an attribute. And let's see. We'll go and reload. And this is honestly the feedback loop that we end up doing on the team. Like we have an idea, we make a new element, and we go, okay, how would an end user actually integrate this? How would they use it in context? Right, and I drop a tweet in context. I'm not entirely sure why it's getting ticked off about that, I'll be honest. But so let's look at, okay, so now when it would save this out, you see there's no inner HTML, right? Because I have that flag. Let's update source and see if it shows up. It says error while parsing the sandbox attribute. Null is an invalid sandbox flag. So this is another aspect as far as these integrations where I mentioned someone might get ticked off that I don't like TypeScript particularly. But I had an attribute here, right? And the type was such that I said, where are you? Where are you? No pop-ups. There you are. No pop-ups. And no pop-ups is a Boolean. And now it's getting ticked off of me, right? That it equals, it's saying null is not a valid sandbox flag, right? In set data, oh, it's also saying set data width. Okay. So set data width if, so we've got set data width value. Okay. So if value equals that or not value, that might be one way to get rid of that one. Now we'll do, okay, undefined. It's not valid for sandbox. Okay, so we've got data theme, same idea. And some of this can happen just based on, it should be okay, actually. Some of this can happen just based on moving this stuff over there. So we do if value and if not value, or the little drag and drop that I do sometimes ticks things off as far as these values. All right, set tweet ID, right? That's set to a value, attribute changed. This dot inner HTML equals IC. So it's saying that things are triggering a rewrite of the page, and then it's getting mad because the sandbox attribute is being set to null somehow. So that would imply that allow pop-ups is null in certain instances, which it is right there, right? So what I need to do is do that, that it's by default nothing as opposed to null. Null, it would be trying to write the data type value into the DOM. So let's see if that helps. All right, still got angry, and it said error while parsing the sandbox attribute undefined is an invalid sandbox flag. And so that is in width being set. So it's not liking that I'm setting these initially, I guess. Yeah, it's not liking that initial setting thing. So undefined is an invalid sandbox flag. It is really not enjoying this allow pop-ups piece. So some of this data layer management, like I'm running into at the moment, is honestly part of why I structure things the way that I do. To use lit element, just because some of this data normalization stuff is a little clunky. So if allow pop-ups at that point, well, no, it should be in there. Let's see if we take out the allow pop-ups flag, if that actually helps this at all. Take that out of there. See if it helps. There's some interesting things with attribute values and trying to assume they're booleans. I don't know that that's what's going on. Oh, we're getting closer though, because those things went away. So that allow pop-ups piece, right? Or another thing would be new value equals the actual name of the thing, right? So if get attributes, no pop-ups. Let's get rid of that one too. Let's get rid of that. See if maybe I end up having some little data binding issues on first paint with these attributes. It's totally possible. Trying to just make this, show up in the page. It is bizarre that it's not allowing it to show up in the page. Theme, Twitter, tweet ID. I should be able to update it and it show. I'm wondering if something is preventing it. Let's see. Oh, you know what? It actually has it there. What if I take out sandbox entirely? Well, that's a little weird. It does actually have. I wonder. Okay, let's see here. If I wonder if there's something associated with the actual Twitter embed thing not being visible, but that it's actually working. Flex. Trying to just mess with this at the moment to get it to show up. It's weird because it should be here. Like it's showing it in the page or in the DOM rather. I'm wondering if it's, and I can select it. Let's say I should be able to select it. I wonder if I'm having an issue with just embedding this thing directly. So I'll have to clean this part up later, unfortunately. Let's see, paste. Oh, includes of null, right? So this is another way actually as well that I can do some initial error trapping, right? And realize that, oh, hey, what if the user has nothing in this field? Does the data type still work downstream? So now we can do this, right? So we just discovered this potential error if somebody puts the tag on the page without anything in it. Twitter, let's just click it. And then I gotta put in a status. It just keeps complaining about it having attributes initially, which is unfortunate. Because I don't really think it knows, but all right. So I'll have to figure that part out. But so the actual Twitter embed tag is working. I'll have to work on the Hacks integration, but that's not a big deal. So I'll do that at a later point in time. Let's add that in. Twitter embed in vanilla and lit element. And I've got my linter that I just need to ensure that it actually does that. All right, so then I'll get push origin after. Now that code will be up. I will add a link to it as well, and then this is where I do learn a publish, because we use Learna for managing our mono repo. So then it'll come up with saying, hey, these are all the things I'm about to patch, which you can see it's been a little bit since we ran this, so there's a bunch of things that need to have a new release. And I hit yes, and it kicks off. And so that is kind of the end-to-end of how we go about making any of these things. So hopefully this was interesting to you. I know this is one of my longer videos. I'll try and do a bit of a write-up, break down some of the different points of it in a dev.to article. And then hopefully I'll have the hacks integration working. I don't want to sit here and just, burn through time trying to figure out why that's not showing up. Because it's entirely possible that it just doesn't want to run an iframe on my computer right here. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out hackstheweb.org or any of my articles on dev.to. If you have anything else in web components land you'd like to see or are interested in hearing about, let me know. I get, some free days here and there or things where I just need to clear my head and do something like this live. So catch you later.